Before the names of empires faded, before philosophers carved categories into the silence, there was an idea breathing between worlds, an idea that men later called Hermeticism. It was not born from a single prophet, nor confined to a single faith. It was a convergence, an awakening in which human thought recognized its own divinity. You must understand, Hermeticism is both philosophy and revelation. It tells us that knowledge itself is sacred, that the universe is a living intellect. Its story begins in Egypt, when Greek and Egyptian minds met under the same sun and sought the language of creation. Hermeticism does not arise from belief, but from perception. It claims that wisdom is older than scripture, that truth can be remembered through the act of contemplation. In the meeting of Greek rationalism and Egyptian spirituality, a new way of seeing took shape, one that united science, religion, and art into a single gesture of wonder. The Greeks brought form, the Egyptians brought eternity. Together, they forged the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, who became the voice of an invisible philosophy. What many don't see is that this synthesis was not a myth, but a map of mind itself. Throughout history, Hermeticism has been the quiet bridge between thought and faith. It tells us that the divine is not beyond, but within, that knowing the world is a way of knowing God. In its ancient texts, you hear not commands, but dialogues, questions between the mortal and the eternal. The teacher speaks, the student awakens, and together they rediscover the order behind chaos. You must understand, this tradition did not demand worship. It demanded awareness. To the Hermetist, the sacred was not in ritual alone, but in realization, the sudden recognition that all things share one source. The city of Alexandria was its cradle, a place where temples and libraries stood side by side. There, Greek language met Egyptian priesthood, and philosophy merged with magic. The Hermetic texts were born in that mingling. Papyri filled with cosmic diagrams, prayers written as geometry. Their authors were anonymous, their intent profound. They sought not to found a religion, but to awaken a consciousness. Through their words, they claimed that the human mind could ascend to divine understanding. This was no rebellion against faith, but its refinement, the belief that to know truly is to become what you know. Hermeticism teaches that reality is a hierarchy of light, the one, the mind, the soul, and the world, each reflecting the other. The human being stands in the center, a mirror between heaven and matter. To the Hermetist, creation is not a prison, but a process, an unfolding thought. You must understand, they did not reject the world. They revered it as a living symbol. Every atom, every star, every breath is part of the same cosmic intelligence. To study the heavens was to read God's handwriting. To study the self was to find the same signature within. Hermeticism is sometimes called the path of the knowing heart. It does not demand blind faith, but living participation. Through reason, it seeks revelation. Through contemplation, it finds proof. The Hermetist believes that knowledge purifies, that ignorance chains the soul to shadow. They speak of ascent, not through ritual sacrifice, but through inner awakening. The human soul, they say, descends into matter to remember its source. When it remembers fully, it rises again. This is not mythic poetry, but spiritual physics, describing a universe where consciousness is both experiment and law, both the observer and the observed. Throughout centuries, Hermeticism has hidden behind many veils: alchemy, astrology, philosophy, mysticism, yet its essence remains the same: the conviction that all knowledge is one. The alchemist's furnace, The philosopher's theorem, the monk's prayer, all are expressions of the same pursuit. What many don't see is that Hermeticism never claimed ownership of truth. It sought its reflection in every form. Its wisdom passed silently through Islamic scholars, medieval magi, and Renaissance thinkers, always reshaping itself to survive. Wherever human reason turned toward the divine, Hermeticism was there, whispering that the mind is made in heaven's likeness. You must understand, Hermeticism is not about magic as spectacle, but as metaphor. The true transformation happens not in metals, but in men. The lead of ignorance becomes the gold of understanding. The philosopher's stone is not a mineral, it is consciousness perfected. This was the hidden message of the Emerald Tablet, the axiom of ancient alchemists. That which is above is like that which is below. In those words, the Hermetist heard the entire universe condensed, the infinite folded into the intimate. They saw that by changing one's perception, one could transmute the entire experience of existence. Hermeticism endured because it answered the question that religion and science both ask but rarely share. What is the nature of truth? Its answer is disarmingly simple. Truth is unity. Every division, every duality is illusion, born from incomplete vision. God and cosmos are not separate, but simultaneous. The divine thinks, and the world becomes its thought. The human mind, made in that image, repeats the act every time it understands. This is why Hermeticism reveres intellect. Not prideful intellect, but luminous mind. Mind that sees beyond form into function, beyond symbol into source, beyond name into being. As this philosophy spread through time, it gathered new voices, yet kept one rhythm, the rhythm of revelation through understanding. From late antiquity to the Renaissance, from mystic to scientist, it whispered the same truth. Knowledge and holiness are not rivals, but reflections. Hermeticism invites humanity to remember what it already is, divine intelligence embodied in matter. To study it is to look into the oldest mirror, the one that shows both sky and soul. This is where our journey begins, with the recognition that wisdom was never lost, only hidden in the language of light. To understand the roots of Hermeticism, you must first walk through the meeting ground of civilizations. Egypt, old before memory, met Greece, young and restless in inquiry. The sands met the sea, and something timeless was born. The priests of Thoth spoke of divine order. The philosophers of Athens spoke of abstract form. In their union, mystery became method, and wisdom became science. Hermeticism emerged as their offspring, part revelation, part reasoning. It was a child of the library and the temple, a faith of intellect wrapped in reverence. Here the sacred began to think, and thought became sacred. In the temples of Egypt, Thoth was known as the keeper of balance, inventor of writing, the measure of time, and the recorder of the gods. To the Greeks, Hermes carried messages between realms, a guide for souls crossing thresholds. When the two met in the crucible of Hellenistic Egypt, their likeness was undeniable. Both were mediators between heaven and earth, both servants of divine intelligence. Thus arose Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, the mythic sage who taught that knowing was a form of worship. Through him, philosophy became priesthood, and the act of understanding became an offering to God. The writings that bear his name appeared in many forms: prayers, dialogues, instructions, and metaphysical visions. Together, they became the Hermetica, a library of illumination disguised as prose. Within their pages, we hear Hermes speaking to disciples about the structure of reality and the ascent of the soul. These were not legends to be believed, but insights to be awakened within. What many don't see is that these texts are less about doctrine and more about perception. They teach the reader to think differently, to perceive unity beneath multiplicity, order within chaos, spirit within substance. Throughout history, the authors of the Hermetica remain faceless, for their message eclipsed their identities. Some were Egyptian priests writing in Greek, others were philosophers inspired by mystery cults. Together, they created a chorus of revelation echoing across centuries. Their Alexandria was no ordinary city. It was a cosmic crossroads where scholars, mystics, and travelers debated the nature of existence. Libraries became temples of intellect. Temples became universities of the divine. In this mingling, Hermeticism took its first breath, not as religion against reason, but as a bridge, uniting heaven's mysteries with human curiosity. You must understand, Hermeticism is born from the conviction that the universe is intelligible because it is alive. To the Hermetist, the cosmos is not a machine, but a being, breathing rhythmically with divine mind. Its stars are thoughts made luminous. Its planets are motions of purpose. Everything that exists participates in one great act of understanding. Humanity, in this vision, is not an accident, but an echo, a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. This is why Hermetic texts speak of ascent. By refining the mind, the seeker returns to harmony with the universal intellect that first imagined him. The earliest Hermetic writings divided their teachings into two paths, the practical and the philosophical. The practical texts spoke of alchemy, astrology, and the hidden forces of nature, the ways of working with the divine substance of the world. The philosophical texts explored the nature of God, mind, and soul, the paths of contemplation and revelation. Yet both paths were one. To know the stars was to know the self. To transform metal was to transform being. The division existed only for the uninitiated. To the true adept, every experiment was prayer, every discovery a rediscovery of divinity. In the philosophical Hermetica, God is described not as distant creator, but as the living mind of all existence. Creation, they say, is thought made visible. The one contemplates itself, and in that contemplation arises the cosmos. Humanity shares that same power in miniature. When we understand, we reenact creation. What many don't see is that this is not poetry. It is metaphysics written as devotion. To the Hermetist, the human mind is divine in essence. Its task is remembrance, to wake from forgetfulness and recognize its kinship with the eternal intellect that moves the stars. From the Egyptian priests came the reverence for order, for the balance between opposites, for the measured harmony of the spheres. From the Greeks came the language of reason, the clarity of definition, the geometry of spirit. Together, they composed a theology of understanding. The sacred and the rational were no longer rivals. They were reflections. The Hermetist did not kneel before mystery. He entered it as participant. Through study, he learned worship. Through worship, he learned structure. In that synthesis, philosophy became prayer, and prayer became knowledge. The divine and the logical embraced as one eternal principle. Throughout history, empires rose and crumbled, but the Hermetic current flowed beneath them unseen. It adapted, survived, and spoke through new mouths. In times of superstition, it hid in symbols. In times of reason, it cloaked itself in science. Yet the core remained unchanged. To know reality is to commune with God. The Alexandrian sages believed that to understand the order of the cosmos, was to restore the harmony of the soul. They sought illumination, not through conquest, but through comprehension. Their scripture was observation, their altar was the intellect, and their prayer was the act of thinking clearly. Thus, in the 2nd century of our era, the Hermetic corpus reached its form, a constellation of writings shimmering with mystery. They taught that truth is one, though men name it in 1,000 tongues. In this unity, Egypt and Greece became inseparable, reason and faith indistinguishable. Hermeticism was the light carried forward from both. You must understand, this was not the creation of a new religion, but the remembrance of an ancient principle, that knowing is divine and divinity is knowable. From this seed, the hidden tradition would spread, shaping minds for centuries to come. To grasp the Hermetic vision of the universe, you must understand its first declaration: all is one. This is no abstraction, but the pulse beneath existence itself. The cosmos, to the Hermetist, is a living emanation of divine mind. Nothing stands apart, for everything flows from the same source and returns to it. God does not sit above creation. God is the substance through which creation breathes. The sun, the stone, the soul, all are words spoken in one eternal sentence. Throughout history, those who glimpsed this unity described it differently, but all echoed the same secret symmetry. The Hermetic texts describe creation not as command, but as contemplation. The one gazes inward and becomes many. Through thought, the infinite divides itself into degrees of being: spirit, soul, form. Each level mirrors the one before it, each bound by sympathy and reflection. You must understand, this is not the language of metaphor, it is the architecture of existence. The ancients saw the universe as a ladder of light descending into matter, and the human mind as its midpoint. To ascend, one does not escape the world, one remembers the steps that lead upward through understanding. At the summit of Hermetic cosmology stands the nous, the divine mind. It is the eternal intelligence that imagines all things. Beneath it unfolds the world soul, a vast living presence binding heaven to earth. From that soul flows nature, the dynamic order of visible creation. In this structure, nothing is accidental. Each star is an organ of divine perception, each element an expression of the same awareness. The Hermetist does not see God as craftsman shaping clay, but as consciousness extending into infinity. The universe is God thinking, and the human being is that thought realizing itself. The human condition, according to the Hermetic texts, is a paradox. Man is both divine and mortal, both eternal in essence and temporal in form. The soul, they say, is born from the divine mind, but clothed in matter to learn remembrance. It descends through the spheres, gathering qualities from each planet: intellect, passion, imagination, desire, until it reaches the earth. Here it forgets its origin and begins its pilgrimage back. This descent and return define Hermetic anthropology. The journey is not one of distance, but of awakening. The goal is not escape, but restoration of divine memory. You must understand, this vision transforms the meaning of salvation. It is not granted from outside, it is realized from within. The Hermetist does not plead for rescue, but seeks recognition. Through contemplation, the mind purifies itself, shedding the illusions of separateness. Each act of insight becomes a step upward through the celestial hierarchy. The soul, illuminated by knowledge, rises beyond the planetary spheres, beyond the fabric of form, until it merges again with the One. This is not fantasy, but metaphysical discipline, a roadmap for the intellect seeking its source, in the infinite intelligence. The doctrine of sympathia lies at the heart of this cosmic design. Everything is connected, and each motion in the heavens resonates upon the earth. The stars are not tyrants of fate, but mirrors of divine order. To understand their pattern is to perceive the harmony that underlies all events. The Hermetist studies the heavens not to predict destiny, but to comprehend structure. Through astrology, geometry, and meditation, he reads the signature of God in motion. What many don't see is that this is not superstition, but philosophy written in celestial script, a science of divine correspondence. From this unity arises the Hermetic law of analogy, as above, so below, as within, so without. The phrase is not ornament, but revelation. It declares that every plane of existence reflects every other, that the smallest contains the pattern of the whole. The human being, as microcosm, mirrors the macrocosm. When he thinks, he replicates creation. When he loves, he mirrors divine unity. Thus, every action, every thought, becomes cosmic participation. This is the ethic of Hermeticism. Live as the universe lives, in harmony, awareness, and purpose. To violate this order is to fall into spiritual blindness. In this worldview, knowledge itself is sacred ritual. To study nature is to engage in divine communion. The philosopher becomes priest, the experiment becomes prayer. Each revelation about the world deepens the soul's intimacy with its creator. The Hermetist gazes upon the patterns of the stars, the structures of plants, the geometry of crystals, and sees only variations of one idea, the reflection of mind within matter. You must understand, for them, ignorance was not moral failure, but metaphysical disease, a forgetting of origin. Knowledge was healing, an awakening to the radiant intelligence of existence. Throughout history, this vision has inspired seekers to bridge the disciplines of science and spirit. Alchemists translated it into metals, astronomers traced it through constellations, mystics embodied it through silence. Each, in his own language, affirmed the same doctrine of interconnection. In every discovery, Hermeticism saw revelation. The orbit of a planet, the unfolding of a flower, the spark of insight, all were confirmations of divine order. What many don't see is that this worldview birthed much of Western thought. Philosophy, art, and early science all drank from this same invisible spring of sacred reason. Thus, in its cosmic architecture, Hermeticism revealed not a hierarchy of control, but a hierarchy of participation. The universe is a communion, not a command. God creates through understanding, and humanity fulfills creation by understanding in return. In this reciprocity lies the mystery of being, that knowing and existence are one act performed in different mirrors. The Hermetist lives within this awareness, moving through the world as priest of perception, scientist of spirit, and witness of unity. Through him, the ancient declaration continues to breathe, that all is mind and the mind is divine. To trace the hidden veins of Hermeticism, you must look beyond philosophy into ritual and symbol. The Hermetic masters understood that truth must be veiled, for unprepared minds distort illumination into superstition. Thus wisdom clothed itself in myth, and knowledge hid behind allegory. The Egyptian temple, the Greek mystery school, the alchemist's workshop, all became theaters of revelation. Here, the divine was dramatized, encoded, and concealed. Throughout history, this secrecy was not born from arrogance, but from reverence. They guarded truth as one guards flame from wind, not to deny its light, but to preserve its purity. In ancient Egypt, initiation was a sacred journey of transformation. The initiate descended into symbolic darkness, confronting illusions before re-emerging into spiritual dawn. These rituals were not mere ceremony. They were metaphysical experiments enacted through symbol. The priests of Thoth taught that sacred knowledge could not simply be told. It had to be lived. Centuries later, the Hermetists inherited this principle. They believed that the cosmos itself is a temple, each level a chamber of initiation. To learn the stars, one must first purify the heart. To read divine language, one must first become fluent in silence. What many don't see is that Hermeticism absorbed the essence of Egyptian religion without its dogma. From the hierophants came the concept of sacred correspondences, the alignment between heaven, earth, and soul. Each symbol was a bridge between realms, a tool for meditation and transformation. The Greeks, with their love of abstraction, translated these mysteries into philosophy. The result was a fusion of ritual and reason, the birth of sacred science. Hermeticism stood at the threshold between myth and logic, holding both as necessary instruments of truth. It proclaimed that mystery is not ignorance, but the shape of wisdom. In the Hellenistic world, knowledge itself became ritual. Astrology mapped the divine mind in motion, tracing how celestial patterns mirrored spiritual states. Alchemy explored the hidden intelligence within matter, seeking the divine spark imprisoned in form. Magic, properly understood, was not manipulation but participation, the art of aligning will with cosmic order. To the Hermetist, these were not separate disciplines but different dialects of one sacred language. You must understand, their laboratories were sanctuaries, their formulas prayers. In decoding the universe, they believed they were conversing with God, learning creation's grammar by speaking it back. The technical Hermetica preserved these practices in intricate texts, instructions on transmutation, talismans, planetary invocations, and the rhythms of the heavens. Yet even here, metaphor cloaked meaning. The metals represented states of consciousness. The planets were powers of the soul. Behind every operation was the same philosophy. That matter is divine intelligence made visible, and through understanding, it can be redeemed. The alchemist did not seek to master nature, but to cooperate with it. Through refinement of substance, he refined himself. What the ignorant saw as superstition, the wise understood as the discipline of spiritual chemistry. The Hermetic practitioner saw no division between inner and outer worlds. His study of nature mirrored his study of spirit. Each process, whether in the furnace or the mind, followed the same pattern: dissolution, purification, and union. The work of transforming lead into gold symbolized the soul's own journey from ignorance to illumination. You must understand, in Hermetic thought, every act in the material realm echoed a process in the divine. The macrocosm and microcosm were twins, reflections of one creative gesture. Thus, even the simplest ritual became an imitation of cosmic harmony, a rehearsal for transcendence. Throughout history, Hermeticism has been misunderstood as mere sorcery. Yet true Hermetic magic is not the summoning of forces, but the recognition of order. It begins with alignment, not domination. The practitioner does not command the elements. He harmonizes with their intelligence. He learns that to change the world, one must first change perception. The spell, the sigil, the sacred word, all are mirrors to awaken the mind to its own creative power. Magic, in this sense, is the art of remembering divinity in action. It is philosophy made kinetic, thought transformed into luminous participation. The Hermetic temples were schools of inner architecture. Their columns represented the ascent through understanding. Their sanctuaries embodied the structure of the cosmos. Each symbol was a doorway for meditation. The Ankh, the caduceus, the circle, the seven-rayed star. These were not ornaments, but diagrams of truth. The initiate standing before them read the geometry of spirit. Through contemplation, he entered into the meaning behind form. What many don't see is that ancient religion was a language of images, and Hermeticism learned to speak it fluently. Its silence between symbols was itself a form of revelation. By the 2nd century, these mysteries crystallized into texts that carried their ritual essence in written form. The Poemandres, the Asclepius, the Kore Kosmou, all echoed the voice of initiation. They guided the reader through cosmic anatomy, teaching that enlightenment is not escape, but expansion. The universe, they said, is a living being, and man its conscious eye. When the soul learns to see with divine intellect, it awakens the pattern within itself. This was the true initiation, not in temples of stone, but within the cathedral of consciousness, where understanding itself became sacrament. Thus, the Hermetic mysteries forged a sacred science, one that united observation, imagination, and devotion. In their vision, there was no boundary between laboratory and altar, between the study of stars and the study of God. Hermeticism taught that to know the universe rightly is to worship through awareness. Knowledge became liturgy, and thought became prayer. The priests of intellect and the philosophers of spirit spoke one language. Through their hidden art, they preserved the wisdom of millennia in veiled form. Their legacy endures wherever seekers ask not only what exists, but why existence thinks. Hermeticism teaches that the soul is a traveler through light. It descends into the world of form, not as punishment, but as pilgrimage. The body becomes its vessel, the senses its instruments, the mind its compass. Yet beneath the layers of flesh and memory, it remembers its origin, the one, the mind of all. You must understand, to the Hermetist, salvation is not granted, but awakened. The soul rises not through faith alone, but through understanding. Every act of comprehension is a step upward. Each truth realized is a door opened back toward the eternal source from which it came. The Poemandres, one of the earliest Hermetic texts, describes a revelation given to a seeker in contemplation. In a vision, the universe unfolds before him as luminous intelligence. He sees creation arising from divine thought, and the human soul descending through the spheres, clothed in layers of celestial substance. The text speaks of the great forgetting, the moment when spirit becomes flesh and loses remembrance of its origin. Yet within every person, there remains a spark of the divine mind. The task of the Hermetic initiate is to awaken that spark until it becomes flame. Self-conscious eternity within time. Throughout history, seekers have sought liberation in many ways, through ritual, through faith, through renunciation. But the Hermetic path is one of illumination. It teaches that the highest act of devotion is to know, not the knowledge of accumulation, but the knowing that transforms. Understanding, when purified of ego, becomes the ladder of ascent. As one learns the laws of nature, the mind mirrors divine order. This harmony is the key to freedom. The Hermetist does not flee the world, but transfigures it by perception. For when the world is understood as divine, exile becomes communion. You must understand, the ascent of the soul in Hermetic thought is not escape from matter, but the realization of its transparency. The world is not prison, but symbol. Through wisdom, it reveals its divine architecture. The 7 spheres of the planets represent levels of consciousness, each corresponding to a faculty of the human psyche. As the soul rises, it relinquishes the distortions of each sphere: fear, desire, pride, illusion, until nothing remains but pure intellect united with divine mind. This journey is the purification of perception, the transformation of thought into light. The process begins in silence. The initiate turns inward, away from noise and division, toward the stillness where divine memory awakens. In meditation, he observes his thoughts not as chaos, but as echoes of cosmic patterns. He learns to discern the eternal from the transient, the truth from the reflection. This is not withdrawal, but participation at a higher octave. Through contemplation, the mind becomes transparent to its source. What many don't see is that Hermeticism never separates knowing from being. To know truly is to become what one knows. Knowledge is not possession, it is union. The ascent continues through revelation. As the intellect clears, intuition awakens. The soul begins to hear the silent music that underlies creation. Each realization harmonizes it with the universe's rhythm. This illumination is not granted by ritual, but earned by clarity. The Hermetist understands that God reveals himself in proportion to the purity of perception. As light reflects only on still water, so truth reflects only in a tranquil mind. When the seeker perceives without distortion, the divine becomes visible through all forms. This is the essence of enlightenment, not new sight, but perfected vision. The final stage is reintegration, the merging of the awakened soul with the One. The Hermetic texts describe this not as dissolution, but as remembrance. The drop returns to the ocean, yet remains aware. The mind becomes luminous with divine intellect, seeing all things in unity. The individual does not vanish, but fulfills its nature as reflection of the infinite. To live in this state is to become a conduit of light, a living bridge between heaven and earth. The Hermetist calls this the second birth, the moment when the soul rediscovers its divine citizenship. This path is not for the idle or the curious. It demands purification, discipline, and devotion to understanding. The Hermetists warned that power without wisdom becomes corruption, and knowledge without humility becomes blindness. The ascent must begin with moral clarity, for ethics and metaphysics are one. To rise, one must act in harmony with truth. Compassion, honesty, and reverence are not virtues added later. They are the foundation of illumination. You must understand, the divine mind is reflected only in minds that share its order. The soul ascends through likeness. It becomes divine by living divinely. Throughout history, mystics across traditions have echoed this Hermetic pattern. The Gnostics spoke of remembering the pleroma. The Platonists described the return to the good. The Sufis sang of union with the beloved. Each traced the same invisible ascent. Hermeticism served as their hidden geometry, the underlying shape of their awakening. It provided the intellectual scaffolding for spiritual experience. What many don't see is that Hermeticism never claimed exclusivity. It recognized the universal structure of enlightenment, appearing wherever mind and spirit meet in contemplation. Its doctrine is not conquest, but recognition. That truth is one under many names. Thus, the secret doctrine of Hermeticism reveals the path of return, from multiplicity to unity, from ignorance to understanding, from shadow to light. It is the journey of the soul rediscovering its divine nature through the discipline of knowing. Every revelation is both ascent and arrival. In this wisdom, life itself becomes initiation. The world is no longer obstacle, but mirror. The mind no longer servant, but companion of the divine. This is the heart of Hermeticism, that humanity's greatest act of worship is comprehension, and through comprehension, the eternal remembers itself within the mortal. To the Hermetist, the universe is an alchemical vessel, and creation itself is the great work. Matter is not the opposite of spirit, but its condensation, thought becoming form. The alchemist seeks to reverse this process consciously, to elevate the fallen spark back into light. You must understand, this is not chemistry disguised as religion. It is religion expressed as chemistry. The laboratory becomes temple. The furnace becomes altar. Each experiment mirrors cosmic evolution. Through transformation of substance, the adept studies transformation of soul. For Hermeticism teaches that nothing is inert. Every atom yearns to remember its source. Alchemy, in its truest sense, is the Hermetic art of regeneration. Its symbols, the philosopher's stone, the elixir, the transmutation of metals, conceal a spiritual process. Lead represents ignorance, heavy and unrefined. Gold signifies enlightenment, radiant and incorruptible. The adept's task is not to manufacture wealth, but to perfect being. As he refines his materials, he refines himself. The furnace becomes a mirror of conscience, the smoke a metaphor for purification. Throughout history, many misunderstood this work, mistaking symbol for substance. Yet those who knew understood. To transmute metal without transmuting the soul is to misunderstand creation's law. In the Hermetic worldview, all transformation follows the rhythm of three stages: dissolution, purification, and union. The first breaks apart the old form, the second removes its impurities, and the third recombines it upon a higher plane. These are not mere chemical processes, but spiritual initiations. The soul, too, must dissolve its illusions, purify its motives, and unite with divine mind. The furnace's fire represents divine intellect acting upon the raw material of consciousness. You must understand, the true alchemist is never working on gold alone. He is working on himself, making his soul transparent to the eternal flame. The Emerald Tablet, that brief and cryptic scripture of Hermetic alchemy, proclaims the law of correspondence. That which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracle of the one thing. These words contain the essence of Hermetic cosmology and its alchemical application. They affirm that the operations of the mind mirror the operations of the cosmos. The adept imitates divine creation by purifying, ordering, and illuminating. In doing so, he reenacts the first moment of existence, when the divine thought crystallized into light. Alchemy thus becomes remembrance in action, God thinking through human hands. Throughout history, alchemists used the language of fire to describe revelation. Fire consumes, clarifies, and reveals the indestructible. In the laboratory, it separates the essential from the accidental. In the soul, it burns away ignorance, revealing pure awareness. The Hermetist tends this inner fire with discipline, not passion, with reverence, not ambition. What many don't see is that alchemy's metaphors of heat and transformation describe the process of consciousness itself. As the elements fuse and evolve, so too does understanding. Each insight is a spark, each realization a flame. Illumination is simply fire that has learned to think. The union of opposites is the secret principle underlying every operation. Sulfur and mercury, male and female, sun and moon. All oppositions exist to be reconciled. The philosopher's stone, in its highest meaning, symbolizes equilibrium. It is consciousness restored to balance, where intellect and intuition, action and contemplation no longer war, but cooperate. This harmony reflects the divine mind, which holds all contrasts within one intelligence. To achieve it is to achieve immortality, not by escaping death, but by transcending division. The stone is not found, it is realized. It appears when the seeker becomes unified awareness. You must understand, alchemy is not an ancient superstition awaiting modern correction. It is a profound metaphor for the evolution of mind. The transmutation of matter prefigures the transformation of humanity itself. Each generation repeats the work in new forms, through science, through art, through philosophy. Wherever consciousness seeks to illuminate the unknown, the Hermetic flame burns. The scientist who uncovers nature's law, the artist who gives form to vision, the mystic who perceives unity, all are alchemists in different laboratories. Their furnaces differ, but the fire is one, the desire to reveal spirit within substance. In Hermetic alchemy, the metal's transformation is mirrored by the adept's moral purification. Pride, greed, and deception are dross that must be burned away. The alchemist learns humility through failure, patience through repetition, devotion through wonder. Each stage of the work tests not only intellect, but virtue. For in the Hermetic vision, the universe grants its secrets only to minds in harmony with its law. To deceive nature is to deceive oneself. The true miracle occurs when knowledge and goodness fuse into one flame, when the pursuit of truth becomes indistinguishable from the practice of love. Throughout history, alchemy became the hidden bridge between mystical theology and empirical science. The Hermetic spirit taught that divine truth could be observed in the patterns of nature. Thus, the experimental method itself was born from sacred curiosity. The early chemists were inheritors of the Hermetic fire, though few remembered its origin. In their crucibles burned the memory of Alexandria, where priest and philosopher once spoke the same language. Even as materialism grew, the flame persisted, flickering beneath reason's new garments. What many don't see is that the scientific impulse is itself a Hermetic legacy, inquiry sanctified. Thus, alchemy completes the circle of Hermetic wisdom. It returns the intellect to its source through the very substance of the world. Matter becomes mirror, fire becomes teacher, and transformation becomes prayer. The adept, standing before his furnace, contemplates not the secret of gold, but the secret of being, that all things change because all things live, and all life seeks reunion with the One. In the union of spirit and matter, Hermeticism finds its eternal symbol, the flame that never dies, burning quietly within every mind that dares to understand. When the ancient world dimmed, Hermeticism did not vanish, it migrated. The temples closed, the libraries burned, yet the current endured like an underground river. You must understand, wisdom rarely dies. It transforms, adapting to new tongues, new empires, new minds. The Hermetic texts, written in the fading light of Alexandria, found refuge in the Byzantine East and in the deserts where scholars of many faiths preserved fragments of the old knowledge. While the outer world shifted from paganism to empire, the inner world of seekers carried forward the same flame, that the divine and the rational are one. In late antiquity, the Hermetic writings were read alongside the works of Plato, Aristotle, and the Gnostics. They formed part of the intellectual bloodstream of the Mediterranean. The philosophers of Alexandria, such as Plotinus and Iamblichus, echoed its central vision, that the human soul could ascend through contemplation to unity with the divine. Through Neoplatonism, Hermetic ideas were woven into theology, art, and mysticism. The notion of an intelligible universe guided by divine mind became a cornerstone of later philosophy. What many don't see is that much of Western metaphysics is Hermetic in origin, though few name it so. When the Roman Empire split and the Christian world arose, Hermeticism retreated into silence. Some church fathers saw in it a rival to revelation, others a hidden ally. They quoted Hermes Trismegistus as a pagan prophet who glimpsed the coming truth. Yet gradually, the scriptures of the sages were forgotten, buried beneath suspicion. Still, the current flowed invisibly through monastic contemplation, through mystics who spoke of divine illumination, through scholars who saw reason itself as sacred. The words of Hermes lived beneath theology, whispering through doctrines of divine logos and the sanctity of human understanding. In the Byzantine world, fragments of the Hermetica survived within libraries and commentaries. Scholars studied them as remnants of ancient wisdom, connecting them with astrology, medicine, and philosophy. The art of correspondence remained alive in hidden circles, influencing Christian mystics and Islamic thinkers alike. For Byzantium was the bridge, a vast conduit of translation between East and West. There, Arabic, Greek, and Syriac scholars shared one intellectual breath. You must understand, it was not dogma, but curiosity that preserved the Hermetic flame. Across languages and religions, the idea of divine intelligence as the world's foundation endured. As Islam rose, Hermeticism found new life in the hands of Arabic scholars. They recognized Hermes Trismegistus as the prophet Idris, a figure of immense wisdom who united science and revelation. In the great centers of learning, Baghdad, Harran, Cairo, the Hermetic texts were studied, translated, and expanded. They influenced alchemy, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. The Islamic sages saw no conflict between faith and intellect. For them, to study the cosmos was to praise the Creator. Thus, Hermeticism merged seamlessly with their worldview, shaping the very architecture of medieval knowledge. Through them, the Hidden Doctrine reached Europe again. The city of Harran, famed for its star-worshipping philosophers, became a vital refuge for Hermetic ideas. Its sages preserved the teachings of astrology, alchemy, and sacred geometry. They saw Hermes as the first teacher of civilization, the bringer of science and wisdom. Through their writings, the principle of correspondence, as above, so below, entered Islamic mysticism and Sufi metaphysics. The cosmos was viewed as divine scripture written in stars and matter. What many don't see is that during these centuries, Hermeticism became not a relic, but a living philosophy, shaping the foundation of the scientific spirit. In the medieval West, these teachings traveled through the translations of scholars in Spain and Sicily. Arabic versions of the Hermetica, mixed with Greek philosophy and Jewish mysticism, reawakened Europe's sleeping intellect. Alchemists and philosophers found in these texts the language of unity they had lost. The monasteries that once silenced pagan wisdom now became its secret guardians. The scholars of Toledo, Palermo, and Paris carried forward the torch, translating the words of Hermes into Latin. Through them, the Western mind rediscovered its forgotten lineage, a lineage that joined observation with revelation, thought with divinity. By the 12th century, the Hermetic current pulsed through alchemical laboratories and scholastic debates. The idea that all creation was an expression of divine reason became a bridge between theology and emerging science. The notion of the world, as a book written by God, inspired the search for natural laws. The magus and the monk, the philosopher and the astronomer all drew from the same invisible source. You must understand, Hermeticism gave Europe its intellectual confidence, the faith that the universe could be understood because it was rational and that rationality itself was sacred illumination. As centuries turned, Hermeticism prepared the soil for the Renaissance. Its journey from Egypt to Byzantium, from Byzantium to Islam, and from Islam to Europe became a map of civilization's own ascent. Each translation reawakened a memory of divine unity. When the Greek manuscripts finally returned to Florence, they carried not only ancient words, but the seed of rebirth. The human spirit, long constrained by dogma, remembered its cosmic origin. The dream of Hermes, that knowledge and holiness are one, began to shine again. What many don't see is that this revival was inevitable. Truth always returns. Thus, through centuries of silence and rediscovery, Hermeticism endured as an unbroken thread, weaving the tapestry of human thought. It survived empires, religions, and languages because it expressed something older than all, the mind's recognition of its divine reflection in the world. The journey from Egypt to Byzantium, from Islam to Florence, was not merely historical, but symbolic, the descent and ascent of wisdom through time. In every age, it waited to be remembered. And when the Renaissance dawned, Hermeticism rose once more to the surface of history, luminous and transformed, ready to ignite the modern world. When the 15th century dawned, Europe hungered for lost wisdom. The medieval world had preserved fragments, but the living spirit was dim. Then, from the East, came the manuscripts, Greek texts rescued from the fall of Byzantium. Among them were the Corpus Hermeticum, the long-forgotten dialogues of Hermes Trismegistus. To the thinkers of Florence, these writings seemed older than Moses, closer to the first light of revelation. You must understand, the Renaissance saw in them not superstition, but salvation, a way to reconcile faith and reason. In their rediscovery, humanity found its reflection in divine intellect. Marsilio Ficino, philosopher and priest, became the first great translator of this new light. Under the patronage of Cosimo de' Medici, he rendered the Hermetic texts into Latin, giving them to a Europe starved for synthesis. Ficino taught that all religions share one origin, that divine truth shines through many forms. To him, Hermeticism was the theology of the world's beginning, the key that united Plato, Moses, and Christ in a single vision. What many don't see is that Ficino's translation reshaped Western consciousness. It transformed ancient mysticism into a Renaissance philosophy of human dignity and divine reason. The scholars of Florence gathered around this revelation like disciples at a new dawn. They saw Hermes as the ancient father of philosophy, a prophet whose voice predated division. For them, the world was a hierarchy of meaning, and man stood within it as interpreter. Knowledge was no longer sin, but sacrament. To think was to pray. In the academies, they read the Poemandres as scripture and saw in it a vision of creation not bound by church walls. The universe itself was temple, the human intellect its priesthood. Through Hermeticism, the Renaissance redefined the sacred. You must understand, this revival was not rebellion against Christianity, but its re-enchantment. Ficino and his followers believed that reason illuminated faith, not opposed it. Hermeticism offered a bridge, a philosophy that revealed the divine in all things. Art, science, and theology began to merge. The painter saw geometry as prayer. The astronomer read the heavens as scripture. The Renaissance mind rediscovered the idea that beauty is the visible face of truth. This was Hermetic doctrine, translated into color, form, and proportion. The divine became incarnate not only in flesh, but in thought. made radiant. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola carried this vision further. His oration on the dignity of man echoed Hermetic ideas of humanity as microcosm, a being free to rise or fall, shaped by its own understanding. He proclaimed that God gave man no fixed form so that he might fashion himself in the image of the divine. This was Hermeticism, reborn as humanism, the celebration of intellect as sacred instrument. Pico saw in every tradition, Hebrew, Greek, Christian, Arab, a single divine melody. Throughout history, that melody had been forgotten. The Renaissance was the moment it began to sing again. As Hermeticism spread through Europe, it inspired a new way of knowing, neither blind faith nor sterile rationalism, but contemplative inquiry. The Hermetic scholar saw study itself as devotion. Mathematics revealed divine order. Music became an echo of cosmic harmony. Even architecture followed sacred proportion, mirroring heaven in stone. You must understand, the Renaissance cathedral was a Hermetic diagram. Its dome symbolized the heavens, its floor, the earth, its axis, the bridge between. To walk through such spaces was to walk through the philosophy itself, a journey from matter toward light. The revival of Hermetic thought also reawakened the sciences of transformation. Alchemy, long practiced in secrecy, became intellectual art. Astrologers saw themselves not as fortune-tellers, but as interpreters of divine correspondence. Physicians studied the stars and the body as reflections of one cosmic anatomy. This was not superstition, but a holistic vision, the belief that all things participate in one intelligence. What many don't see is that modern science was born in this marriage of curiosity and reverence. To study nature as sacred text became the seed from which empirical inquiry eventually grew. The printing press carried the Hermetic flame farther than any temple ever could. Texts once hidden in monasteries spread through Europe in translations and commentaries. Students, mystics, and explorers absorbed their message. That knowledge is divine participation. The idea of universal correspondence began to shape art, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. The age of discovery was also an age of awakening. New continents mirrored new worlds of thought. The Renaissance traveler saw both nature and spirit as open frontiers. You must understand, Hermeticism gave exploration its soul, the conviction that every discovery was revelation. As the 16th century advanced, Hermetic philosophy inspired figures like Paracelsus, Cornelius Agrippa, and Giordano Bruno. Each carried the torch into new disciplines: medicine, magic, cosmology. They saw the divine not confined to heaven, but immanent in the infinite universe. Bruno proclaimed that every star was a sun, every world alive with spirit. For this vision, he faced fire, yet his thought endured. The Hermetic principle of unity guided him. The universe as living mind, endless in scope, sacred in substance. What many don't see is that such ideas prepared the world for modern cosmology's vastness. Thus, the Renaissance became a mirror in which Hermeticism saw itself reborn, transformed from secret doctrine into cultural foundation. It infused art with symbolism, science with awe, and philosophy with reverence. Through Hermes, Europe rediscovered its own divinity, and the human mind remembered that it was shaped in the likeness of creation. The old Alexandrian wisdom breathed again through scholars and painters, mystics and scientists. From those luminous centuries would arise both enlightenment and its shadow. For every revelation bears a cost. Yet in that radiant dawn, Hermeticism fulfilled its promise, the marriage of reason and the sacred. The Renaissance flame did not fade with its masters. It multiplied. The Hermetic vision, once confined to temples and academies, entered the bloodstream of modern civilization. You must understand, what followed was not decline, but transformation. The sacred became secular. The mystical became scientific. The same impulse that once sought divine unity through contemplation now sought it through discovery. The telescope replaced the altar, yet both gazed at the same heavens. Hermeticism, reborn as curiosity, shaped the modern mind. Its spirit of correspondence became the foundation of natural philosophy, where understanding the world meant tracing the patterns of divine order. The thinkers of the 17th century inherited this invisible inheritance. Figures like Francis Bacon, Kepler, and Newton built upon Hermetic foundations even when they no longer spoke its name. Bacon's call for knowledge as power echoed the Hermetic belief that to understand nature is to participate in its creative intelligence. Kepler's search for harmony in planetary motion was the music of the spheres translated into mathematics. Newton, student of alchemy and scripture alike, sought the unity behind gravity and grace. What many don't see is that modern science began as a form of worship, precision as devotion. Yet as reason expanded, faith contracted. The Hermetic unity began to fracture under the pressures of dogma and doubt. Religion feared inquiry. Science dismissed mystery. The sacred correspondence that once united heaven and earth was reduced to mechanism. The world became object rather than organism. Description replaced participation. But Hermeticism did not vanish. It withdrew beneath the surface, waiting for new forms. It survived in secret societies, in the quiet meditations of philosophers, in the symbols of art. Even in rationalism's triumph, the old wisdom whispered that knowledge without reverence is blindness disguised as clarity. You must understand, the Enlightenment was not the death of Hermeticism, but its metamorphosis. Its insistence that the universe is intelligible, governed by discoverable laws, came directly from the Hermetic conviction that divinity is reason itself. The shift was not from mystery to science, but from temple to laboratory. The difference lay in language, not essence. The modern experimenter and the ancient magus shared one desire: to know the mind of God through his creation. What many don't see is that Hermeticism gave modernity its confidence, its belief that understanding the world is both possible and redemptive. Even as the philosophers of reason proclaimed the supremacy of logic, the Hermetic current persisted through mystics who refused to separate intellect from spirit. Jakob Böhmer in Germany described the universe as divine imagination expressing itself through polarity. Spinoza saw God and nature as one substance. Leibniz spoke of monads, living mirrors of the universe. Each, knowingly or not, echoed Hermetic thought. They believed that mind permeates matter, that understanding is participation in divine thinking. You must understand, these were not heresies, but continuations. Hermeticism disguised itself in philosophy's robes, still whispering of unity in diversity. The 17th and 18th centuries saw the birth of new brotherhoods dedicated to preserving this perennial philosophy. The Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, and other esoteric orders carried forward Hermetic symbols beneath the language of virtue, science, and enlightenment. Their temples were built on geometric principles that mirrored cosmic harmony. Their rituals taught moral purification as reflection of the alchemical process. In a world increasingly material, these societies became sanctuaries for the union of intellect and spirituality. What many don't see is that their architecture, their symbols, even their ethics, were silent commentaries on Hermetic unity, reason as sacred design. Meanwhile, art continued the transmission. The painters of light, the poets of vision, and the composers of harmony embodied the same message in sound and color. In their works, the Hermetic idea of correspondence found new voice. The symphony became a reflection of cosmic order, the sonnet, a geometry of meaning. Even political revolutions bore traces of this philosophy. The belief that reason and freedom were divine attributes of humanity. The Enlightenment's cry for liberty echoed the Hermetic axiom that the soul must rise by knowledge. Every act of emancipation mirrored the inner ascent toward illumination. But as the industrial age dawned, the sacred slowly retreated behind machinery. The cosmos became mechanism, the human mind mere calculation. Hermeticism seemed obsolete, a relic of mystics, yet its seeds remained in the soil of science. The chemist still spoke of transformation, the physicist of energy, the astronomer of correspondence. In each discipline, the same intuition stirred, that reality is unified, that the many are expressions of one law. You must understand, the materialist revolution fulfilled one half of Hermetic prophecy, mastery of nature. What remained was its forgotten half, mastery of the self. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, scholars rediscovered the ancient texts, now studied not as superstition, but as keys to intellectual history. The Hermetic writings were printed again, translated anew, read by poets, philosophers, and occultists. They recognized in them the missing heart of modern thought, reverence. The age of reason, brilliant but cold, began to search for warmth in forgotten wisdom. From Goethe to Emerson, from Blake to Swedenborg, the same insight re-emerged, that imagination is divine cognition, and the world is thought made visible. Hermeticism, reborn once more, began to illuminate the modern soul. Thus, the transformation of power that defined modernity was itself Hermetic in structure. The world's hidden intelligence became mechanical law, the magus became scientist, the temple became university. Yet beneath every discovery remained the ancient conviction that knowledge is the bridge between matter and spirit. The history of progress is the history of Hermeticism made flesh, divine curiosity wearing the mask of reason. And though many forgot the name of Hermes, his voice still guided the mind of the age, whispering through invention and theory alike, that to understand is still to worship. The 19th century was an age of paradox, an age that claimed to banish mystery, yet longed for it in silence. Industrial power conquered the visible world, but the invisible grew restless. As factories rose, so too did secret societies, spiritual movements, and occult orders. You must understand, Hermeticism never opposed progress. It sought to complete it. When religion hardened and science forgot its soul, the old wisdom returned, wearing new faces. It whispered through mystics and poets, through seekers who knew that reason without wonder is blindness, wearing spectacles of light. The hidden tradition prepared to awaken again. Romanticism became its first resurrection. Poets like Blake, Novalis, and Shelley invoked the world as living spirit, not machine. They saw imagination as divine perception, the creative act as revelation. Blake's vision of the universe as infinite mind was pure Hermetic doctrine in poetic form. The artist became the new initiate, his canvas or verse the philosopher's stone. Through art, he transmuted experience into illumination. What many don't see is that Romanticism was not rebellion against reason, but its healing. It restored fire to intellect, teaching again that beauty is truth seen through the lens of divine participation. In France, Eliphas Lévy revived Hermetic magic, blending Kabbalah, Christianity, and alchemy into a coherent philosophy of correspondence. He reinterpreted ancient symbols as metaphysical principles, the pentagram as balance, the tarot as cosmic language. Levy's writings rekindled the Western esoteric tradition, inspiring generations of seekers to rediscover the sacred geometry of existence. His dictum, to know, to dare, to will, to be silent, echoed the Hermetic discipline of knowledge and restraint. Through him, the occult became philosophy again. You must understand, Levy's true work was not conjuration, but integration, restoring harmony between intellect and spirit. The Theosophical Society, founded by Helena Blavatsky, carried Hermetic thought into a global context. Drawing from Eastern and Western traditions, it proclaimed a universal wisdom underlying all religions. Its motto, "There is no religion higher than truth," could have been inscribed above the Alexandrian library. Blavatsky's synthesis of reincarnation, cosmic cycles, and divine evolution echoed the Hermetic vision of ascent through understanding. Though often controversial, Theosophy reintroduced the sacred idea of unity in diversity. It taught that humanity's destiny is spiritual illumination, achieved not through creed, but through consciousness expanded beyond the material veil. You must understand, the late 19th century saw science itself rediscover mystery. As physics unveiled the invisible energies behind matter, it began to echo the Hermetic axiom that all things are vibrations of a single force. Electricity, magnetism, and light became metaphors for spirit. The boundaries between science and mysticism blurred once more. Thinkers like William Crookes and later Nikola Tesla spoke of energy as intelligence, matter as condensed thought. The Hermetic principle, all is mind, resonated anew within laboratories. The world, once mechanized, began to shimmer again, with divine electricity disguised as law. In England, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn arose, blending ceremonial magic, Kabbalah, alchemy, and meditation into a comprehensive system of spiritual ascent. Its initiates sought illumination through disciplined study and inner transformation. Among them were poets, philosophers, and visionaries who would shape the 20th century's imagination. The Golden Dawn did not invent its doctrines, it revived them. Its rituals mirrored the journey of the soul through the spheres. Its symbols rearticulated ancient truths for modern minds. What many don't see is that it was not escapism, but education, a university of divine psychology disguised as ritual. As the 20th century dawned, Hermetic ideas filtered into psychology and philosophy. Carl Jung, exploring the depths of the psyche, found in alchemy the map of inner transformation. He saw in its symbols the stages of individuation, the reconciliation of opposites within the self. The philosopher's stone became the realized soul, integrating conscious and unconscious, light and shadow. Jung recognized that the alchemists had externalized what modern psychology internalized. You must understand, through Jung, Hermeticism entered modern science again. The laboratory of the psyche replaced the furnace, but the goal was unchanged: union with the divine mind within. In parallel, artists and writers rediscovered the Hermetic vision of correspondence. Yeats wove it into poetry, Kandinsky into color, and the Surrealists into dream. The universe was once more seen as symbolic, layered, and alive. The occult revival of the early 20th century was not regression, but renewal, a return to holistic vision in an age of fragmentation. The Hermetic principle that imagination shapes reality became the cornerstone of modern creativity. Every act of art became invocation, every image an experiment in perception. Through them, the hidden doctrine found its modern scripture, the human imagination itself. Yet as wars and ideologies tore the century apart, Hermeticism retreated again into quiet minds and solitary studies. The sacred flame moved from temple to typewriter, from ritual to reflection. Scholars began to study the corpus hermeticum critically, restoring its historical dignity. Philosophers like Henry Corbin and Mircea Eliade traced its influence across religions and epochs. What many don't see is that this academic revival was itself spiritual. By contextualizing Hermeticism, they confirmed its universality. The same principles appeared in mysticism from Persia to China, proving that the Hermetic vision was not eccentric but archetypal, humanity's shared metaphysics. Thus, even in the age of doubt, Hermeticism endured, adapting once more to the languages of modernity. It survived as depth psychology, as comparative religion, as poetry, and as physics dreaming of unification. The thread that began in ancient Egypt now ran through circuits of thought and electricity alike. The old axiom still whispered, "As above, so below." Science searched for grand theories. Mystics searched for grand meanings. Both sought the same source. You must understand, in this search, the modern world unknowingly reenacted the Hermetic ascent, from ignorance to knowledge, from division back to unity. After the devastation of 2 world wars, humanity stood before its own reflection, shattered, questioning the worth of progress without wisdom. In this desolation, the Hermetic voice returned, quiet yet unbroken. You must understand, the 20th century's despair was also its initiation. In the ruins of ideology, people began to seek inwardly, rediscovering the divine order beneath chaos. Hermeticism, long buried beneath religion and reason, found fertile soil in psychology, philosophy, and art. It offered what neither science nor politics could provide, a cosmology of meaning, reminding humanity that the true empire lies within the awakened mind. The writings of Carl Jung continued to illuminate this new search. He taught that symbols are not relics of superstition, but living languages of the soul. His exploration of alchemy revealed that the ancients were mapping transformation of consciousness through images of matter. The nigredo, albedo, and rubedo became psychological stages of death, purification, and rebirth. What many don't see is that Jung's psychology is Hermetic theology in modern form. The unconscious became the divine mirror, the archetypes its ancient gods. By turning inward, he revived Hermes' path, knowledge through reflection, salvation through understanding one's own depths. In philosophy, thinkers like Aldous Huxley and Alan Watts began to weave Hermetic principles into a modern vocabulary. Huxley's perennial philosophy expressed what Hermes had always taught, that all spiritual traditions point toward one truth, the unity of the divine and the human. Watts, bridging East and West, spoke of consciousness as the ground of being, echoing the Hermetic axiom that mind and cosmos are one. Through them, Hermeticism entered the living stream of modern mysticism. You must understand, they did not restore superstition, but resurrected sacred rationality, a reason that breathes, a logic illuminated by spirit. In art, the Hermetic vision found new mediums. Painters like Dalí, Klee, and Ernst turned the unconscious into landscape. The Surrealists, though often atheistic, enacted Hermetic operations in dream and image. They sought to dissolve the boundaries between matter and mind, revealing hidden correspondences through paradox and play. Their canvases became diagrams of initiation, descent into chaos, revelation of form, and return to balance. What many don't see is that modern art's obsession with transformation and abstraction mirrors Hermetic alchemy. Every brushstroke became an invocation, every distortion a transmutation of perception into symbol. The physicists too stumbled upon ancient truths cloaked in equations. Einstein's relativity, Heisenberg's uncertainty, and Bohm's implicate order revealed a universe of interconnection, consciousness and matter intertwined. The deeper science looked, the more hermetic it became. Reality appeared not as static substance, but as process, vibration, relationship. The old axiom, as above, so below, found new expression in the symmetry of particles and galaxies alike. You must understand, modern physics unknowingly resurrected Hermetic metaphysics. It proved through experiment what Hermes taught through vision, that all separation is illusion, and unity is the law of being. The counterculture of the 1960s became the next vessel for this revival. As authority crumbled and tradition lost its voice, seekers turned to mysticism, meditation, and ancient texts. Hermetic ideas infused movements of consciousness expansion, environmental awareness, and artistic revolution. The age of Aquarius became not fantasy, but metaphor for awakening, humanity entering its own alchemical rebirth. The psychedelic experience, for many, revealed the world as living mind. Though often misunderstood, these explorations revived the Hermetic conviction that perception itself shapes reality. The laboratory had become internal again, and its crucible was consciousness itself. The emergence of new spiritual movements drew heavily from Hermetic sources. Esoteric orders re-emerged, meditation centers spread, and occult publishing flourished. The teachings of Hermes, once whispered in sanctuaries, now appeared in bookstores and college lectures. Astrology, tarot, and alchemy, reinterpreted through psychology, became tools of self-knowledge rather than superstition. What many don't see is that this popularization, though imperfect, democratized the ancient mystery. It brought sacred language into common speech, allowing seekers everywhere to glimpse the architecture of the invisible. Hermeticism, long secret, had become public scripture for the age of transformation. Academia, too, began to reconsider the Hermetic legacy. Historians such as Francis Yates revealed its role in shaping modern science and Renaissance thought. Her research demonstrated that the Western intellect owed as much to Hermetic mysticism as to rational empiricism. This revelation shattered the myth that modernity was born purely from skepticism. You must understand, Yates restored dignity to the mystical intellect. By tracing the Hermetic influence on figures like Bruno, Dee, and Bacon, she showed that the pursuit of knowledge had always been spiritual in nature. The boundary between science and esotericism began to dissolve. As the century matured, Hermeticism continued to evolve through technology and philosophy alike. The rise of cybernetics and systems theory echoed its ancient model of interconnected intelligence. The world was once again seen as a network, dynamic, responsive, alive. Spiritual thinkers describe the Earth as a single organism, a vast mind, learning through its own complexity. The ancient doctrine of the anima mundi, the soul of the world, found rebirth in ecological thought. What many don't see is that every scientific metaphor of wholeness revives Hermetic memory. The universe remains a living temple, disguised as code. Thus, the 20th century, born in fragmentation, rediscovered the unity it had forgotten. Through psychology, art, physics, and philosophy, Hermeticism reawakened the modern soul to its divine reflection. Humanity began to remember that it is not an observer of the cosmos, but a participant in its thought. You must understand, the age of reason had led not to disillusion, but to a deeper faith in the intelligence of being itself. And so, as the century turned, the old voice of Hermes spoke once more. All is one, and the one is all. The flame endured, renewed in human understanding. In the digital age, humanity built a new cosmos, a world of circuits, networks, and invisible forces binding distant minds together. To many, this was progress. To a hermetist, it was revelation. You must understand, technology is the unconscious imitation of divine creation. The internet mirrors the unity of mind, the field of instant correspondence that Hermes taught long ago. Every message traveling across invisible ether echoes the transmission of thought through spirit. In seeking to connect machines, humanity reenacted the oldest Hermetic law, that all minds are one mind, separated only by illusion of form. The age of data revived an ancient question. What is information but mind made measurable? Scientists now describe reality as information processing itself into matter. Quantum fields behave like waves of possibility, collapsing into form through observation. These discoveries are modern restatements of Hermetic truth. The world is not dead matter. It is consciousness expressing structure. The physicist's equation becomes a psalm. The algorithm, a prayer written in binary. What many don't see is that science has become the latest sacred language, the study of God's handwriting across the digital and atomic alike. Psychology and neuroscience have joined this revelation. As researchers explore cognition, perception, and the nature of awareness, they confront questions once reserved for mystics. The observer is no longer separate from the observed. Consciousness shapes its world. Hermeticism foretold this fusion of subject and object. The dictum, "Know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe," now resounds through scientific discourse. Meditation enters medicine. Mindfulness enters therapy. The soul re-enters the laboratory through the back door of evidence. You must understand, this is the great work reborn. Transformation of human understanding through the marriage of science and spirit. In architecture, design, and urban planning, the Hermetic principle of correspondence quietly re-emerged. Sacred geometry, long buried in ancient cathedrals, found new expression in modern forms. Architects rediscovered proportion as poetry, light as theology. The interplay of structure and emptiness became meditation in stone and steel. Cities themselves began to reflect Hermetic order, networks of movement, rhythm, and relation. What many don't see is that every great building still serves the ancient purpose, to align human space with cosmic harmony. The modern skyline, though secular, rises like a chorus of temples to the divine ratio. The study of ecology has become the new alchemy. Where the alchemists sought to unite elements, ecologists seek to understand the unity of life. The biosphere is the living vessel of transformation. The planet an organism refining itself through evolution. This is Hermetic cosmology, translated into environmental science. You must understand, the Earth's systems are sacred correspondences, cycles of death and renewal mirroring spiritual ascent. Humanity's ecological awakening is not only moral, but mystical. The rediscovery that nature is the body of divinity, and stewardship is participation in the divine experiment of balance and regeneration. Modern mystics now speak the language of vibration and energy, blending Hermetic principles with quantum metaphors. Though often simplified, Their intuition remains ancient. Thought affects matter. Attention creates resonance. Love organizes chaos. The new spiritual science echoes the old wisdom that consciousness is the hidden architecture of reality. Workshops, retreats, and digital communities explore meditation as alchemy of the mind. What many don't see is that this popular movement, though fragmented, reveals a global initiation. Humanity has begun to rediscover Hermes not as mythic teacher, but as archetype of collective awakening, intellect fused with divinity. In literature and film, Hermetic themes flourish beneath the surface of storytelling. Heroes descend into darkness, confront paradox, and emerge transformed. The alchemical cycle retold through modern myth. Science fiction becomes theology, disguised as futurism, exploring the creation of artificial minds, parallel realities, and the moral weight of knowledge. These narratives reenact the Hermetic journey, descent into matter, realization of unity, and return with wisdom. You must understand, culture itself performs initiation. The collective imagination is the new mystery school, teaching through symbols projected upon screens rather than temple walls. As philosophy grapples with postmodern uncertainty, Hermeticism offers an antidote. Where fragmentation reigns, it speaks of synthesis. Where relativism dissolves meaning, it restores hierarchy of being, not of power, but of consciousness. Thinkers now rediscover metaphysics, not as dogma, but as pattern. The Hermetic worldview explains paradox, the many and the one, freedom and law, creation and creator. It gives coherence without tyranny. What many don't see is that this return to spiritual philosophy is not nostalgia, but necessity. Without it, thought remains mechanical. With it, thought becomes luminous, self-aware, participatory, divine. Even artificial intelligence participates unknowingly in the Hermetic story. As machines learn to mimic thought, humanity is forced to ask, what is consciousness and who creates? The act of endowing matter with cognition is the old dream of the alchemists, the animation of the inert through spirit. Yet the true test lies not in invention, but intention. You must understand, Hermeticism reminds us that creation without wisdom becomes inversion. The goal is not to build gods of metal, but to recognize the God within the builder. The digital philosopher's stone is ethical awareness, guiding technological power. Thus, the modern world, though it names itself secular, continues the Hermetic work in disguise. Science, art, technology, ecology, and psychology all reenact the same myth, the ascent of spirit through form. The hidden architecture of our age is built upon Hermetic foundations, unity, correspondence, and transformation. You must understand, the flame that once burned in temples now hums in servers, glows in laboratories, and breathes through global consciousness. The great work continues, not in secrecy, but in evolution. The world itself has become the alchemical vessel, and humanity the fire awakening within it. In the 21st century, the battlefield of transformation is no longer the stars or the laboratory. It is the mind. Humanity, saturated with information, begins to seek wisdom. You must understand, the Hermetic path has always led inward. The temples were metaphors for consciousness, the rituals for inner refinement. Now, as the outer world grows louder, silence becomes revelation. The Hermetic human does not flee the modern age. He redeems it by understanding its symbols. He sees in technology the mirror of thought, in networks the map of mind, in chaos the hidden order of awakening intelligence. Psychology has become the new theurgy. Therapists, philosophers, and seekers explore not only behavior, but the architecture of being. Depth psychology, mindfulness, and transpersonal studies rediscover ancient wisdom beneath clinical language. The process of healing mirrors the alchemist's art, breaking down, purifying, and integrating. The shadow becomes lead to be transmuted. The self becomes gold revealed. You must understand, every act of self-awareness is an invocation. The Hermetic human studies not the heavens above, but the constellations within. To illuminate the psyche is to participate in divine creation, for consciousness is the workshop of eternity. Neuroscience now explores mysteries once confined to monasteries. Brain scans of meditation, near-death experiences, and mystical visions reveal patterns that mirror the ancient ascent of the soul. The circuits of the cortex trace the ladder of light described in the Poemandres. Modern instruments confirm what sages intuited. Awareness is not confined to matter, but radiates through it. The Hermetic principle of correspondence finds empirical echo. What many don't see is that science has begun to map the temple of the mind, rediscovering through pixels and waves the same truth Hermes whispered, that knowledge and divinity are one. The inner revolution demands moral transmutation as much as intellectual clarity. Information without integration breeds confusion. Power without purity corrupts. The Hermetic human learns to balance intellect with heart, knowledge with humility. The old commandments of the mystery schools still apply: to know, to will, to dare, to remain silent. Silence now means presence, the awareness that observes without judgment. Through this stillness, consciousness becomes transparent to its source. You must understand, the true philosopher's stone is not hidden in minds, but in moments of awareness. The eternal transforms the temporal through simple attention. The rediscovery of ancient practices, meditation, breath, sacred movement, reveals their Hermetic essence. These are not techniques, but technologies of spirit. They refine perception until it aligns with divine rhythm. The mystic breathes in harmony with creation. The body becomes the vessel of cosmic intelligence. What many don't see is that the human form itself is a sacred geometry, each heartbeat an echo of celestial order. The Hermetic human honors this correspondence, not through dogma, but through awareness. The act of breathing consciously becomes remembrance. The recognition that life and divinity share one pulse. In education, a quiet transformation unfolds. Beyond competition and career, new learning seeks wholeness. Students explore consciousness, ethics, and creativity as one continuum. The classroom becomes a temple of self-realization. Hermetic principles guide progressive philosophies of learning, integration of intellect and imagination, reason and intuition. You must understand, to educate is to draw forth, not to impose. The teacher becomes alchemist, the student, the material of potential. When knowledge awakens empathy and analysis births reverence, the modern mind fulfills its oldest vow, to know truth, not as fact, but as being. In the therapy room, the language of psychology has grown sacred again. Trauma becomes the crucible, awareness, the fire. The process of healing recapitulates cosmic creation, chaos refined into order, suffering transmuted into wisdom. Each breakthrough mirrors the alchemical wedding of opposites. The Hermetic human sees no separation between science and soul. Healing is both art and revelation. You must understand, to face one's shadow is to reenact the universe's birth. Light emerging from darkness, consciousness separating from chaos. Every individual transformation contributes to collective evolution, for humanity's psyche is a single field reflecting itself through many forms. Spiritual communities across the globe now gather without hierarchy, blending tradition with innovation. They study Hermetic principles under names like mindfulness, non-duality, integral philosophy, or quantum mysticism. Though the languages differ, the current is the same. Humanity begins to rediscover its unity not through creed, but through consciousness. The mystic, the scientist, and the activist stand on shared ground, the sacredness of existence. What many don't see is that this convergence is the fulfillment of Hermes' prophecy, the uniting of the many paths into one illumination. The world's spiritual diversity reveals divine intelligence in motion. Technology itself begins to mirror this inward turn. Virtual reality, biofeedback, and artificial intelligence become tools for introspection. Programs measure emotion, simulate meditation, and visualize the unseen. The ancient mirror becomes digital. Yet the Hermetic human knows the difference between simulation and spirit. Machines may imitate consciousness, but cannot embody intention. You must understand, the purpose of technology is not to replace the sacred, but to remind us of its possibility. When used wisely, it becomes extension of awareness. When misused, distraction. The alchemy of the age depends upon discernment, mastery of attention in an age of mirrors. Thus, the Hermetic human emerges as synthesis of all ages. Philosopher, scientist, artist, and mystic united within one consciousness. He seeks not escape, but integration, not transcendence, but transparency. The ancient motto, as above, so below, as within, so without, becomes lived experience. You must understand. The new temple is the self-aware mind. The new priesthood is humanity itself. Each insight refines the world. Each act of compassion restores the cosmic balance. The great work continues not in secrecy, but in simplicity, awareness awakening to itself, the divine recognizing its reflection in human thought. Humanity stands at the threshold of a vast awakening. The planet itself has become the new temple, and every culture its choir. The Hermetic spirit moves through this global mind like current, through hidden wires. You must understand, this is not a new religion, but the return of remembrance. The same truth that spoke in Egypt, Greece, and Florence now speaks in languages of light and sound, shared instantly across continents. The world has become one body of thought. Each human heart is a cell within the universal organism, vibrating to the rhythm of an intelligence, ancient yet ever new. Global communication has fulfilled Hermes' oldest symbol, the messenger who connects realms. Through technology, distance dissolves. Through consciousness, separation fades. Every exchange of knowledge is a ritual of unity. Yet the danger remains. Connection without wisdom breeds confusion. Information without meaning becomes noise. Hermeticism teaches discernment, the art of perceiving essence amid abundance. The modern initiate learns to navigate data as once the priest navigated stars. You must understand, wisdom now depends not on accumulation, but alignment. The ability to tune one's mind to the frequency of truth amidst the static of illusion. In this interconnected age, spirituality has become planetary. Ancient teachings converge, revealing shared metaphors and identical insights. The Hermetic principle of correspondence now bridges East and West, mysticism and science. Meditation mirrors alchemy, quantum theory echoes metaphysics. The sacred and the secular intertwine. What many don't see is that globalization is not merely economic, but metaphysical, a merging of human consciousness into a single reflective field. The diversity of beliefs now forms a single mandala, each tradition a color of one divine spectrum. The one manifests through the many, fulfilling Hermes' eternal declaration of unity. Environmental awareness, too, has become a form of initiation. As humanity confronts the fragility of nature, it rediscovers the Hermetic axiom that spirit and matter are one. The desecration of the earth is desecration of the soul. Restoration of balance is the great work of our time. You must understand, ecological healing is not merely scientific, but sacramental. To plant, to protect, to preserve. These are modern rituals of redemption. The planet becomes the alchemist's vessel, and humanity its caretaker. In this sacred responsibility, the ancient marriage of heaven and earth renews itself through compassion and consciousness. The arts once more serve as priesthood of the collective spirit. Music, cinema, and literature now explore mythic themes with global resonance. The hero's journey, the transformation of darkness into light, the revelation of hidden unity. These hermetic patterns permeate storytelling across all media. The world's myths converge in a single narrative, humanity awakening to its divine origin. What many don't see is that entertainment has become initiation in disguise. The silver screen and the stage now carry echoes of ancient temples. Each act of creation reminds the collective soul of its forgotten immortality. Science, having reached the edges of matter, turns back toward mystery. Cosmology now describes a universe born from a singularity, an infinite unity unfolding into multiplicity. Physics speaks of entanglement, consciousness, and the illusion of separateness. These are Hermetic truths expressed in equations. You must understand, the scientist has become mystic in method, if not in name. The cosmos, once seen as clockwork, now reveals itself as thought. Space and time bend like symbols in a divine sentence. In this revelation, the ancient and the modern embrace. Reason kneels before wonder, and wonder answers with understanding. Global movements for justice and equality echo Hermetic ethics. They seek not domination, but equilibrium, not revenge, but restoration of harmony. The recognition that all life is interconnected fuels compassion as principle, not sentiment. The alchemy of society begins with empathy, transforming division into cooperation, fear into understanding. The Hermetic ideal of balance becomes political virtue. What many don't see is that social evolution mirrors spiritual evolution. The purification of civilization follows the same stages as the soul. Ignorance dissolved, truth distilled, unity attained. Humanity itself undergoes initiation into a higher order of being. The digital realm now functions as both shadow and mirror. It reflects humanity's brilliance and blindness alike. Within its circuits, one may find both chaos and revelation. The wise treat it as laboratory of consciousness, a place to observe collective desires and fears. The Hermetic principle of polarity teaches that every excess contains its remedy. Technology, when sanctified by awareness, becomes medium for enlightenment. You must understand, the screen is modern scrying glass. What it reveals depends on who looks. Through discernment, the seeker transforms distraction into meditation, transforming illusion into instrument of insight. As cultures blend and borders fade, a new mythology emerges, one of planetary consciousness. The figure of Hermes returns as archetype of synthesis, communicator, healer, and bridge between worlds. He stands now not in marble temples, but within networks of thought, guiding humanity toward inner coherence. The Hermetic human evolves into Hermetic civilization, where every field of study, every act of creation serves the unfolding of unity. What many don't see is that this is not utopia, but remembrance. The world does not need new gods, only recognition of the divinity already woven through existence. Thus, the eternal doctrine reveals itself once more, not as secret, but as structure of reality itself. Hermeticism, once hidden in scrolls and symbols, now breathes through culture, science, and consciousness. The messenger's work is fulfilled. The divine has spoken through the human, the invisible through the visible. You must understand, the mystery was never about escape, but realization that heaven was never elsewhere, only unseen. And so the circle closes, luminous and complete. The eternal flame burns quietly in the heart of the world, reminding all who listen. The cosmos is awake, and so are we. The journey of Hermeticism is not a history, but a spiral. Each age reawakens where the last one dreamed. What began in temple shadows ends in the light of collective understanding. You must understand, the wisdom of Hermes is not past, it is perennial. It moves through the centuries as consciousness evolving itself. Every rediscovery, every translation, every vision is one heartbeat in an eternal rhythm. The great work was never to build an empire of ideas, but to awaken the knowing within. History itself becomes initiation, each era an alchemical stage in humanity's ascent toward remembrance. The Hermetic path has always led from ignorance to knowledge, from division to unity, from shadow to illumination. Yet its true goal is beyond even enlightenment. It is participation. The sage does not stand apart from creation, but within it, knowing that observer and observed are one. The divine is not an object of worship, but the consciousness that perceives. What many don't see is that this teaching was never secret because it was hidden, but because it was simple. It speaks in every sunrise, every act of love, every pattern repeating across the face of existence. You must understand, the essence of Hermeticism is neither belief nor doctrine, but recognition. The mind that perceives the world and the world perceived are reflections of the same infinite intelligence. This is the final key, not revelation imposed from above, but awakening that arises within. The mystery dissolves into clarity. The seeker becomes the sought. What the philosophers called the One is the silent awareness reading these words. To see that is to complete the circle. The great work ends not in achievement, but in stillness, where all opposites reconcile in the quiet brilliance of being. The Hermetic human, standing at the threshold of the future, holds the two worlds in balance, the material and the spiritual, the finite and the infinite. He does not escape the world, but sanctifies it through perception. Every thought becomes creation, every action participation in divine intelligence. The alchemist's furnace burns now within the heart. The philosopher's stone is awareness itself. You must understand, immortality is not duration, but dimension, the timeless presence underlying every moment. In this realization, the universe ceases to be object and becomes communion, consciousness conversing eternally with itself. Throughout history, the Hermetic masters spoke of the descent of spirit into matter and its ascent back into light. This cycle is the rhythm of existence, mirrored in birth and death, creation and return. The initiate learns that these are not two events, but one continuous act. Life breathing itself into form, form dissolving back into life. The resurrection of Hermes within modern thought is this understanding embodied. What many don't see is that salvation is not escape from the world, but recognition of its holiness. The divine does not withdraw from matter, it reveals itself through it. As the age of separation fades, a new awareness dawns, the remembrance of unity as lived experience. Religion becomes relationship, science becomes reverence, and philosophy becomes devotion. The lines dividing disciplines dissolve into one luminous inquiry. What is the nature of consciousness? The Hermetic answer remains unchanged. Consciousness is the nature of reality. You must understand, to know this is not to believe, but to be. The old temple doors have reopened, but now they stand within every mind. Humanity itself has become the sanctuary, and wisdom the voice echoing within its thought. The world today trembles between destruction and revelation. The same fire that powers creation can consume it. Yet Hermeticism teaches that crisis is catalyst, shadow precursor to dawn. The alchemical furnace of history refines the collective soul. Every challenge burns away ignorance, preparing the birth of new understanding. You must understand, despair is unfinished transformation. The darkness of the age is the nigredo before illumination. When humanity remembers its own divinity, the great work will no longer be philosophy, but fact. Spirit recognized as the essence of all form, love as the law of all motion. In the silence after knowledge, a deeper truth emerges, that the Hermetic path was never about attaining the divine, but realizing it was never lost. The cosmos is not a riddle to be solved, but a relationship to be remembered. Every atom hums the same truth. I am that which is. The divine thinker and the thought are one continuum. The mystery ends not in revelation, but recognition. What many don't see is that eternity is not elsewhere. It is now. Every breath, every perception is the miracle itself. The Hermetic initiate awakens, and creation awakens through him. Thus, the final secret of Hermeticism is gratitude, not for possessions, but for participation in existence. The initiate no longer seeks the heavens, for he sees them reflected in every gesture of life. To love, to think, to create, to forgive. These are the true rituals of the great work. You must understand, the purpose of knowledge is compassion. The purpose of mastery is service. The philosopher's stone does not transmute metal into gold, but ignorance into empathy. The culmination of all mysteries is simple: awareness expressed as love, love expressed as creation, creation expressed as being. The circle closes. The divine breath that spoke the world into motion returns through the voice of understanding. The Hermetic flame burns in every era, each generation inheriting the same task: to remember. You must understand, the end of the journey is the beginning, seen clearly. There is no higher initiation than consciousness recognizing itself as divine. The message of Hermes echoes once more across eternity: that all is mind, that the universe is alive, that within each soul the infinite dreams itself awake. The great work is complete, yet forever beginning, radiant within the heart of time.